Students, we are going to start lecture number 22, and we are going to discuss something new today. We are going to start the algorithm based on unsupervised learning. But as usual, at the beginning, we are going to have some recap of what we have learned in the last lecture. Last lecture, you remember, we learned KNN, and we also clarified about the artificial neural network. So, classification is a very important algorithm, a class of algorithms used in every engineering branches, and material science engineering uses a lot, whether it is a regression, decision tree, k-nearest neighbor, KNN, support vector machine, or artificial neural network, or random forest, or even Bayes. These are widely used, and I cannot discuss each of these separately because of the time constraint, but many of these algorithms are available in internet as well as in the books. So, I am discussing only few important ones, that is the main purpose. So, we have already talked about decision tree, regression, KNN, SBM, and ANN, and many other things you can always learn and from books or literature. If you have problems, please get back to me in the discussion time. So, artificial neural network is based on the data processing done by biological systems like neurons in our brain. So, every neuron has dendrites, and then you have something called a cell body or soma with a nucleus. So, informations are gathered or input is taken by the dendrites. This is processed by the cell body, you can see that, and then finally the output of this neuron is ejected or given by the axon. Axons are connected to another neuron via synapses, and that is what they act as a link. So, therefore, it is a parallel processing technique in which each processing element is a neuron, and this exactly same thing we use in ANN or artificial neural network. We have interconnects which provide you the inputs. Inputs are nothing but variables with some targets, as you know, and then we add weights or multiply weights with these variables. So, get W0 x0, W1 x1, Wn xn, and finally we sum it over, and after that we apply some activation functions, and this is done for every neuron, that is every layer in artificial neural network, and finally we get an output. That is what is shown here. You can see here inputs are x1, x2 to xm, and there you can sum it over, but you do not get much benefit. You have to apply weights. Why you have to apply weights? Because you can say which of these inputs are more important compared to others. That is why you have to apply weights. So, weights are provided W1 to Wm, and then each weight is multiplied with the input like x1 W1, x2 W2 to xm Wn, and finally it is summed over, and after that we apply activation function. So, this is the main aspects of ANN. This activation functions or the transfer function many people call, they convert these additions into output. Output will be a function as a function of k, like yk is written as a function of pk, and this output is of one layer. Remember, if I go back here, you have different layers, inputs, then layer 1, there are many hidden layers. So, each layer this output is used as input. That means, output of a previous layer is used as input to the following layer, and the same kind of calculations is done. That is why it is called a parallel processing system. So, in a nutshell, what we use is basically multilayer perceptrons. Why we use? Because humans have the ability to identify patterns within the accessible information with a very high degree of accuracy. So, I have given a lot of examples. So, simply we can detect which is car, which is a bicycle very easily, because we know over the time period when after our birth how a car looks like, how a bicycle looks like, and what are the distinguished features. Now, artificial neural network is exactly similar kind of systems, but these are basically used to imitate the human learning capabilities, and that is done in a very complex architecture way just now we discussed, so that it can mimic the human brain. So, perceptron is basically simple binary classification algorithm like yes or no, 0 or 1 type, and this is modeled using the concept of neuron. So, the perceptron is a simple algorithm machine, it takes values inputs and give the output as 0, 1. However, there are many other perceptrons which can give even text values or some other values also, numerical values also. Why only yes or no? It can also provide some other values also. So, in a multi-layer we use a network. We use a lot of layers known as a hidden layer, and each perceptron in the first layer on the left, okay, first layer of the left is this. It provides the input, it provides the output to the other perceptrons of the second layer, and same thing goes on. All perceptrons actually in the second layer again sends the output to the third layer, and this way things goes on. Each layer can have a large number of perceptrons. As you see here, hidden layer, so many perceptrons present, 1, 2, 3, 4 I have shown, many are possible. As a 3 layer input, hidden, one hidden layer output, but one can have many layers, and this can also be even taken to a deep learning things also, a deep neural network also. That is what it is. So, I will not discuss much details of this, what each task does, each steps does, steps 1, steps 2 and steps 3. Important aspect to talk about the activation functions. These summed over things which you have seen, they needs to be mapped as output using some activation function. One such activation function is like this. I told you in the class, 1 by 1 plus exponential minus z, where z is basically a variable. So, a certain properties of activation function, especially nonlinear nature, you can see makes it possible to train a complex problem also, to solve a complex problems by NN. That is why if we can use a very nice set of activation function, we can use this for the purpose of deep neural networks, or what is known as a deep learning. And output is very simple. In case of perceptrons, outputs can be only 0, 1, that is yes or no, but you can also have different kind of neural networks, or basically perceptrons based models, in which output can be textual, output can be numerical values also. So, there are few features of this in a neural network model. One is a backpropagation, second one is hyperparameters tuning, and third one is advanced structures. So, we said that we are going to discuss about hyperparameters and advanced structures later on, but backpropagation, what I discussed in the last class. Okay. So, this is nothing but a backward pass, right, in football. When you can see in football, sometimes if the team is in a defensive mode, they send back the ball, that is a backward pass, right. It is an algorithm commonly used to train neural networks. So, it performs some iterative backward passes which attempts to minimize a loss function, or basically difference between the known correct prediction and the actual model predictions. And what these backward passes do? They simply optimize the weights given to each of these inputs, so that loss function can be minimized. That is what it is. So, in order to optimize the weights given to each of these inputs, these backward passes are done, because at the beginning weights are set for the individual elements, the neurons, but then calculations are done. But how do you know that these weights are correct? So, in order to do these corrections or optimization of the weights, we simply use this. So, backpropagation is exactly used for adjust the weights of the neurons you can see here. So, results come closer to the actual value. Well, that is about the neural network. A little bit we will talk about KNN. It's very simple technique. It's known as a K nearest neighbors. And what is it? Well, this is a part of lazy learners. Remember, this is not a part of eager learners. ANN is a part of eager learners, okay, where a model is developed, learned, and the predictions are given. In case of lazy learners, we do not develop model. We simply memorize the training data of the machine, and each time there is a need to make predictions, they search for the nearest neighbors from the whole training data. And therefore, the process of finding nearest neighbors is very slow. At the same time, it does not need to learn. So, they can avoid the learning, and that is why it is an easy technique, but it is a lazy technique. So, what is KNN? Okay, let us talk about this particular chart. Let us say there are this plot, we have two clusters, one is red diamonds, other one is the blue diamonds. And now we know that these are the two clusters, correct? You can see that you can make clusters as written category 1 and category 2. Now, given an unclassified point, let us say this one with the new points actually, how do you know it belongs to which class? And this is done by the nearest neighbors, how many nearest neighbors it has. This means the point close to a cluster points is classified as a red, and or if has more number of red neighbors. It will be classified as a blue if it has more number of blue neighbors. So now the question is how determine the neighbors? Simply by calculating the distance of these new data with these points, and obviously nearest neighbor means the smallest distance, right? That is what it is. So with this I can see there are 2 nearest neighbors or 3 nearest neighbors here. Similarly for the blue I have 2 nearest neighbors, right? That is all. So now it is very clear it has more nearest neighbors to red than the blue. So therefore it will be classifying it to red category is more. KNN algorithm exactly works like that. It finds the k nearest neighbors, k can be anything 3, 5, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, to a given data points based on a distance matrix. Simple one is Euclidean distance, that is nothing but root over x1 minus x2 whole square plus y1 minus y2 whole square, right? That is what it is. And then depending on the majority votes of the average k neighbors, we can classify that. This is widely used in medical diagnostics, widely used in many other techniques, even in stock markets also. So k classification is basically a technique which assigns a test sample with majority category, and in practice k is usually chosen to be odd to avoid some ties. Let us give that example. Let us say this one. Can you see that there is a point here and this is the point x. We want to find how many nearest neighbor it has. So if I have this, then I have only 1 nearest neighbors. If I have bigger circle, then I have 1 nearest neighbor. Here you have 2 nearest neighbors and here you have 3 nearest neighbors, right? That is what it is. So k nearest neighbors on a record x data, x is the data. So obviously this minus is one category of points, plus is another category of points. Just like blue and red, this is exactly same here also. So depending on the type of nearest neighbors, you decide value of k, you decide the location of the point can change actually. That is why it says that if k should be odd. Let us take first nearest neighbor, I go back. So this is my point, okay. Now I have this matrix. So you clearly see that this blue has 1 black neighbor, let us call 1 nearest neighbor, okay. So therefore it is a black. If I use the 3 nearest neighbors for this is blue. Can you see that if I go back? This 2 nearest neighbors here, 1 black and 2 blue. So that is usually blue, that is what it is. So hence it is correct, but here it is not correct. You can see here if this blue has only nearest neighbor black, so therefore we make it black, it belongs to black. But here it has 2 nearest neighbors blue. We go back here, you can see these 2 are blue and this is a black. So 3 nearby systems, 1 black nearest neighbor and 2 blue nearest neighbor. So therefore majority class is a blue, that is why this become blue. So depends on nearest neighbor, right. So how do you calculate, or give you this example also. Let us say this is another example. So I have blue and I have green, right, and circles. And this is my target point. How do I know which it belongs to? So now you see here what we have drawn. We have drawn nearest neighbors, right. You can see there are 3 blue and 4 green. So what will happen? It should be belonging to green. That is what it is. So therefore, depending on the majority class or majority nearest neighbors, you have to assign your unknown points to that class. So now the question is, there are different types of distance matrix. I only talked about Euclidean only, but you can have Euclidean as this is the Euclidean matrix, Euclidean distance. You can have Manhattan, Chebyshev, quadratic. I have given you all the equations here for your purpose so that you can read it. So depending on your need, you can define which matrix you will do. So obviously some matrix are good for some matrix are not good for some other purpose. So that you have to learn. In fact, if you are not sure about it, you can use several matrices to calculate nearest neighbor and see how nearest neighbors are going to change. So that is about your all the supervised learning. So now let us move to little bit of unsupervised learning. I hope you remember what is unsupervised learning. So unsupervised learning is what? So let us compare that. So in case of supervised learning, what you do? You develop a predictive model based on both the input and output. So that means you have x and also target values. For every x you know the target values. That is what is done. So basically what you have, let us say you have inputs x1, x2, x3 goes up to xn, and for each corresponding values of the target is t1, t2, t3 to tn. So once I know this, then I can develop a predictive model, because I can learn very easily, right. I can allow my machine to learn very easily and develop the predictive model. That is what is done in supervised learning. But that may not be always the case, right. You can have data, you have only input variables like x1, x2, x10, the target values are not available. So what you will do? We will not use any machine learning? Well, obviously you will use machine learning, and for that only you have to use unsupervised learning. So remember, in supervised learning we talked about in detail about for the last 4 or 5 lectures, classification, regression, and so many KNN, descent tree, artificial neural network. For everywhere you have this, that input and the output data are available. For unsupervised learning you do not have. So that means you have to group or interpret data based on input only, there is no other things available to you. So remember this difference. This is the major difference between a supervised and unsupervised learning. So today we are going to learn one such. Remember, supervised learning is commonly used in alloy design of different alloys, because if you want to design a composition, what you need to do is to know that what kind of phases it will form, what kind of microstructure it will develop, what kind of properties you are expected to get. That is why supervised learning is widely used. But unsupervised learning can also be used for other purposes like prediction of properties, or sometimes you have some parameters which you want to cluster. So TS will give you some discussions on how this can be utilized and what are the different ways it can be utilized. So we will talk about it in that purposes, but unsupervised learning is not easy to learn, so therefore please focus on that. So one such technique of unsupervised learning is called as a clustering. The name suggests very simple thing. Clustering is very simple, okay. It is basically described for the task of dividing data into different groups or different rather meaningful groups. That is what it is. The task of dividing data into different meaningful groups. But how do you do that? It will be based on the information of the data set. That is the only thing you have. You have data set x1 to xn. So that is what you have. So based on this based on the data set, whether you can divide this data into meaningful groups or not, that is what is the job of clustering. So now clustering is obviously is an unsupervised learning technique, because you do not have any output data, that is why it is unsupervised, and this is a task of grouping the data point based on their similarity. That is much better definitions, that is much easier to understand. It is nothing but task of grouping data based on the similarities of each other. The basic aim of doing this job is to forming groups of homogeneous data points from a heterogeneous data sets. When you have a large number of heterogeneous data, can I form homogeneous groups? To give an example, let us say this is what happened recently. There is a dysentery outbreak in Delhi, and a physician was plotting the data like this. He was plotting the data of location of these dysentery cases on the map of Delhi. So when he plotted this data, or she plotted the data indicated the cases were clustered around certain areas. You can see there is a cluster here, cluster there, right, or certain junctions. And this helps you to understand why this has happened. In fact, it has been shown that these are the areas which has polluted wells, and therefore polluted water causing the problem of dysentery, and then the administrators can easily go back and check those wells, why they are polluted, whether it is groundwater pollution, sewage pollution, or it is pollution because of some other things, and they can try to fix it. So you can understand how clustering is so important, very important technique to understand problems. So this is widely done. So when you have large amount of data, you can easily do this kind of clustering business. So it is basically aimed at forming groups of homogeneous data points from heterogeneous data sets. So heterogeneous data sets is where it is the cases of dysentery, and it is the patients are coming from all over the different parts of Delhi. Only when you plot the addresses of these patients, then you come to know that these are clusters, and then you know why these clusters are there. Okay, you can see there is an odd man out here. So she or he must have drank the water when this place, some of these places, and drank the water there. So that is also possible. So therefore, basically idea of dividing the data in a meaningful manner is what is known as a clustering. How do you do clustering models? Because we are going to talk about what is that called, different types of algorithms of clustering models. So, first important thing is centroid models. Okay, all of you know centroid, right? If I have a triangle, I know what is a centroid, right? This is what is centroid of a triangle. Now, how do I find centroids? If I know these points, I can easily find the centroids, because centroids will depends upon these 3 corner coordinates of these 3 corner points. You can see this is 2/3 and 1/3 distance of this, that is what it is. If I draw a vertical line from this corner to the opposite sides, and this is 1/3, this is 2/3, right. You can clearly see that. So, therefore, centroid is very important. Why it is the centroid models are very important, and why, how they are useful, we will talk about in the next part of the lecture. Other than that, you can have connectivity models, hierarchical clustering is possible. One can also have density models based on the spatial clustering of application with noise. So, this is called dB scan. dB scan is something you should remember that. D stands for density, B stands for best, A stands for spatial, C stands for clustering, A stands for application, N stands for noise. That is more complicated. So, in the next class we will first talk about centroid models. A K means algorithm, how it is possible.